Hey dolls! So today is my birthday. That is if you are watching this video on November 21st. And if you're not watching this video on November 21st, I hope it's because you're watching it later and not that I didn't make my little deadline that I gave myself and I failed to make it. That being said, I just wanted to do something fun without really much thought. And what could be better than doing a Bloodborne boss tier list? I love Bloodborne. It's probably one of my favorite games, I would say. I say probably because I have to really think about it. I have a core few that I can just instantly go to and be like, yeah, that's my favorite. But Bloodborne, I would say, is probably going to be a part of that. And I purchased this a month after it came out, or a few weeks after it came out. It was really close to when it began. I remember when the loading times after you died were really long. They are significantly shorter now. I didn't finish this game until 7 years after I bought it, though. So it's kind of funny. You can see my PlayStation trophies, and you can see there's a huge gap in between the last one I got and then the most recent one. Yeah. So with that being said, so let's get started here. So I want to make it clear, I have not done all of the is it Crucible? The Chalice dungeons. I haven't done the Chalice dungeons. I haven't completed them. So I fought some of the bosses that are on this list that are part of the Chalice dungeons, but whatever. Okay, it's whatever. So some of this is just let me move my mic here a bit just so I can see the monitor a bit better. So some of this is mostly based off lore, just the overall goodness of the fight. What I mean by that is even if it's challenging, was it still very satisfying to play? Was I very frustrated while beating it? And not necessarily, because sometimes easy bosses aren't really great either. Okay, so let's just get started here. So let's start with the Cleric Beast. So the Cleric Beast is the first optional boss you can fight. I'm just going to put him here right now. That's not necessarily where he may be. So this is the first optional boss you fight. Probably for many people it is the very first fight. It is a very good introduction to the game because we start the game believing we are here to hunt beasts. And what better way than to start with a great beast? And as we learn that the Cleric Beasts are all once members of the church, and they have fallen into their bloodlust. And so it's so I would say probably a B is a really good place to put him because it is a good first solid fight. You can kind of take advantage of using Molotov cocktails against him. It's not too difficult, but it can be quite the struggle for some new people. This is I did play a little bit of Demon Souls prior to playing Bloodborne, but Bloodborne was really my first From Software experience with the new From Software. And the Cleric Beast is a good solid fight. I would say he's a very good, strong, solid B. Good introduction to the world of the game, and kind of an introduction to what exactly the nature of the church is, that they turn into the most vicious of beasts. And we don't really know too much information on who exactly that Cleric Beast was prior to their transformation, but we'll touch upon. But they were someone high up in the church, it seems. All right, next is Father Gascoigne. I'm just going to put him here. This is not his final ranking. Father Gascoigne, this is the first mandatory boss. This is the first boss you have to fight. And for it to be the first boss is probably one of the most difficult, especially for those coming from the Dark Souls series to Bloodborne, because Father Gascoigne is really here to let veterans of this genre know that the approach that you have taken within Dark Souls is not going to be good here. You have to be aggressive and you have to be fast, because Father Gascoigne is aggressive and he is fast. And his introductory scene is somewhat very reminiscent of the Resident Evil zombie head turn, but I love how it has like its own little thing to it. We see that he's like chopping up something within the cemetery, and he just turns to you, and you get that like breath where, you know, all the warm air from his mouth is coming out, and he can see his fangs, and he sort of gives us a warning that we are not much different from him. We too will become a beast as well. And in the middle of his fight, he does turn into a beast, a vicious beast. And if you've been good at exploring the world of Yharnam, you may have stumbled upon a little girl who is very worried about her mother and father. Her father has not been himself as of late, but there was always this song in a music box that would play for him that would bring him back to his senses. And her mother went out to go look for her husband. And it turns out that the father is Father Gascoigne. It's not just a name of the church. Now, he's not a member of the Healing Church of Yharnam. He's a member of a separate church outside of Yharnam. He, much like us, is an outsider of Yharnam that's come here for blood ministration and was thus contracted into the hunt. And we do learn by looking around the cemetery after defeating him that he did kill his wife, because we do find a body with the red brooch that matches the description of the young girl. And you can even take that brooch to the little girl and give it to her, and thus she knows her mother is dead. And because we were able to come back after meeting her father's dead. So returning that brooch to the young girl lets her know that your father, the worst thing, because your mother forgot the music box, the worst thing that could happen happened. And your father, unfortunately, has gone mad. While even when he does become a beast, a part of him still remembers who the man he was, because if you play the music box in the middle of the fight, the beast staggers, and thus allowing you to get in some heavy damage. So Father Gascoigne is a great boss because not just telling you the playstyle you need to adapt for the game, but also, you got some really great lore to him. I mean, even after we learn a bit more of him, even after the fight. But he's also, most importantly, a warning to the player character, to you, that this is the fate that will meet you the further you go into the hunt. The longer you hunt beasts, the more bloodthirsty you become, and the more beast-like you become. And for that, Father Gascoigne, I think, deserves to be an S tier. All right. So we have Blood-Starved Beast. This is the beast contained within Old Yharnam, which is where the beast-like scourge first started out. But we can later kind of come across him as a regular enemy in the Old Hunters DLC as well. And this one, he's much more thinner. He's kind of like a larger regular enemy beast. So he's probably one of the and I think we come across another blood-starved beast kind of in a crucified form. So this is someone, so this one, he's still alive, but he's still very much hungry for blood. So you can use pungent cocktails to sort of lure him, to bait him, and that works really well with combined with Molotov cocktails. Because I remember he was the first boss I had some difficulty with, and I'm trying to think of too much more of the lore and stuff, because I think he's just I think he fits here in B. He's just a fine fight, pretty challenging still, even coming after Father Gascoigne, but it's important I think he is also a mandatory fight, because Garamond does sort of direct you to go to Old Yharnam to go to a chalice church, and I think you get the Tumuru, one of the chalice, you get your first chalice from him. Dark Beast Parl, I'm gonna kind of put in C tier. This one you have to come across before fighting Vicar Amelia, I believe. This is when you are taken to Yarhagul a little early. So you wind up in the jail by one of the wardens that kind of roam around Old Yarnum. I think they roam around Old Yarnum after the Blood-Starved Beast is defeated. Not in Old Yarnum, in regular Yarnum, sorry, and the Cathedral Board. And I actually kind of I had some difficulty with this fight. What's interesting is that the Dark Beasts, they emit lightning, which is very interesting. It's very different from all the other beasts. I don't recall anything too much more special about the Dark Beasts in comparison. What's interesting is Dark Beast Pearl is kind of right behind Old Yarnum. So Yahar'gul is right behind Old Yarnum, because once you defeat Dark Beast Pearl, you can open the door that leads to Old Yarnum, opening up a shortcut. And this is really great if you are wanting to get oh god, I can't remember what they're called, but Jura the Hunter, this is the path you can go to sort of pacify Jura so he isn't shooting you constantly. I give Dark Beast Pearl a C. I already kind of put it there. Part of that is because I winded up glitching her into a corner and defeating her that way. Alright. Vicar Amelia. So eventually we get the gates opened to the Cathedral Ward, whether you can get them opened early by purchasing an item in the Hunter's Dream, or you defeat the Blood-Starved Beast. You can then fight Vicar Amelia. So she's the current vicar of the Healing Church, and she even says a prayer in front of a beast skull that we learn is Lawrence's skull. Lawrence is the founder of the Healing Church. And so she turns into a cleric beast, but it's a cleric beast with, I remember, sort of like a more spirit of the forest kind of vibe to it. So a wolf with antlers. She was the last fight I fought against when I first purchased this game in 2015, and then I never went back to it. And but I remember she gave me such a very difficult time. And then when I was replaying the game earlier this year, she was fairly easy. Part of what makes her so difficult is that she is capable of healing herself. So you have to use, I think, a mist attack or something. A mist that kind of stops healing. But she's not too much different from all of the other, she's not too different from the Cleric Beast in terms of that. I think, though, because once you defeat her, time moves forward within Yarnum. And I realized I am missing a fight here in my little order right here. Okay, so I'll move that there. But I think, because she did at first give me some difficulty, I think just for lore reasons, she kind of lets us know what has happened to the founder of the church, because the skull we come across that she was praying to isn't too different to her own beastly countenance. And yeah, I think that she's a fairly fine fight. I'm gonna give Shadows of Yarnum a D. You fight them in the forest, right in front of Bergenworth when we're heading to Bergenworth, the college that Yarnum was sort of built around, I would say. It turns out that they're not too difficult. I fought them with 2 AI companions, which doesn't really speak much to my skill, but they become regular enemies in the end game. And yeah, they're just fine. I guess they're there to just sort of, Bergenworth is and it is a place that no one's supposed to be able to access, so I think they're just parts of the members of the Healing Church, or maybe even the School of Mensis, because you do fight them in the Nightmare of Mensis later in the game. I think they're just kind of protectorates, even though once you defeat them and you actually go to Bergenworth, there's a whole bunch of really interesting, there's a little bit of the fly, what looks to be a former student but has a huge fly-like head. And then there's even a Yarnum church hunter. Oh, a choir hunter, because they wear white. That's even more difficult that was really hard for me to fight. But because they're kind of generic, and they become regular enemies later on, I think they're D. Witch of Hemwick, I'm also going to give a D, because this is a fight that's really easy to cheese. If you have 0 insight, you can pretty much fight them. So the witches are responsible for scooping out eyes. The people who are kind of in charge, especially for the students of Bergenworth, they believe gaining insight is to acquire more eyes, to line our brains with eyes, something a little bit more literal. And so the witches, they tend to scoop eyes. And I'm not really 100%, I can't really recall too much of the lore behind them, but it's such an easy fight, and there's really very little challenge that, yeah, I'm just going to put it in a D. And here we have Amygdala. I'm just going to put it right here. I'm not going to give it a tier just yet. I might just put it here. Amygdala. So this is something that certain... this is within the Nightmare Frontier. It's kind of a space. So there is the lecture hall, which was a part of Bergenworth, that serves as a conjunction between the various nightmares, particularly the Nightmare Frontier, as well as the Nightmare of Mensis. And Amygdala seems to have been someone that was once worshipped, and we get a tonsil stone that looks very much like the head of these creatures. And we later learn, either by gaining enough insight or after the blood moon has risen, that amygdalas are all over Yharnam, and we've even may have even died to one in the Cathedral Ward. And so we have to give a tonsil stone to another amygdala in order to enter the Nightmare Frontier. And this is the being that some of the college members that have become spiders with men's heads, like Patches, recurring character Patches, worships. Yeah. I haven't fought the one in the Chalice Dungeon, which I've heard is the hardest fight in the entire game. This one was okay. It was just fine. Once you figure out that the head is the soft spot, that's where it just is a matter of being able to reach it. And I think I just extended my blade and just swipe, and I was able to win. But I think, the Nightmare Frontier, it's just a solid C. It's not the greatest, it's not the best, but it's not terrible. All right, and so we got Rom the Vacuous Spider. This one is very important in terms of lore. Rom was once a student at Bergenworth who I wouldn't want to say was the first person to encounter the village hamlet, the fishing village. And because I think Bergenworth knew that the fishing hamlet had a connection with one of the old ones, Cause. And Cause granted Rom eyes. And so Rom was able to ascend in a way to becoming kin of the old ones. So they are somewhat connected to the old ones, but they're kind of like she's considered kin of the old ones, which is not necessarily an old one per se, but it's something very similar. It's not too distant. So like think of the old ones as greater gods and kin as lesser gods. So that's what Rom is. And Rom being vacuous, I think in the Japanese language, it's supposed to mean something pretty derogatory towards intelligence. And so it's an old one that doesn't really have an intelligent mind, per se. However, Rom's purpose is to hide the nature of what is actually happening on Nights of the Hunt. And the Nights of the Hunt, they take place once a month when the moon is at its fullest, where the Church of Mensis tries to commune with an old one, and they commune with the newborn Mergo. And Rom creates a web of deceit that hides the blood moon rituals from the common folk. And once you defeat Rom, this web of deceit can no longer function, and so the blood moon's true face appears. I would say, considering the lore, I would say it's a good B boss. It's not a most difficult boss fight once you realize. Like, I think the most difficult thing is her little spider children. I don't know necessarily what those are, but dealing with their number is probably the worst. And as the fight progresses, she starts to gain more attack. Because at first starts, she's like not attacking you. But her spider children may give problems, so just remember to attack the head. Because like with Amidala, they have a very similar head. The head is very sensitive and is the weak point. And what's also interesting is that when we come across Abritas, they are worshipping, they seem to be praying, or they're in front of another Rom-like spider. And it seems like there was something involved with that place and Queen Yarnum, because when you fight Queen Yarnum in the Chalice Dungeons, you can get her heart. And there was supposed to be something that you were supposed to do where that Rom altar is with the heart, but whatever it is, we don't know anymore. But that altar still plays a role with the Queen of the Vile Bloods. You can pretty much revive her after you tell, is it Arthur? I can't remember his name. After you tell him, you give him a invitation for Canehurst, and he goes and basically mutilates the Queen of the Vile Bloods, Annalise. But you can take Annalise's living flesh, because Annalise can't die, so even when she's like just mounds of flesh, she's still alive. So you can take a piece of her flesh to the altar, and it revives her. How and why is not clear. I think because it might have been cut or incomplete, but it's something you can do. So there's a suggestion of something more significant about Rom that we just don't know, and we may never know. But speaking of Canehurst, we're going to talk about Martyr Logarius. I'm going to go ahead. This is an S tier fight, so Martyr Logarius was part of the... Oh god, I can't remember their name. But he... fuck. I can't remember. Well, it was a section of the church that specified in hunting vile bloods. Basically, there was a trader of the College of Bergenworth that took some of the sacred blood of the Old Ones to Canehurst. And when Canehurst began consuming them, it did change them. And it seems like they would consume blood dregs, basically the blood that was considered unclean by the Healing Church. And whether or not this was why they're considered vile bloods is something like that, I guess, because they were willing to consume the impurities of blood. And the Queen of the Vile Bloods was trying to consume as many blood dregs as possible so she could become a mother to a child of blood, basically become a mother to an old one, which never happened. But a possible relative of hers, I can't remember her name, but it is is it Alana or Elena? I don't remember. Ariana? Lady Ariana, I think maybe? I think Ariana, Lady Ariana, who wears a Canehurst noble dress, whether or not that is actually something she inherited, or maybe it's just a very expensive gift from one of her clients. We don't know, but there is a suggestion that she is related to the royal lineage of Canehurst, alongside another character we'll talk about in a moment. And Martyr Logarius, he was the leader of this faction of the Healing Church that hunted down vile bloods. And he led the massacre on Canehurst. And we come in and we see all of the ghosts that are of many of the noble women that are still haunting the castles of Canehurst. And only Annalise is left alive. And Martyr Logarius learned the truth of Queen Annalise is that possibly through her consumption of blood, it's not made clear, but it's also possibly just something related to how the Canehurst castle very much has this old vampiric feel to it, that her consumption of blood has probably turned her into an immortal. and thus she cannot die. No matter what you do to her, she cannot die. So Martyr Logarius has decided to reside just outside of her throne room and dons the crown of illusion so that no one else can enter. And we fight him, and it's a hard fight. But it was good. It was such a good fight, though. Oh man, it felt really good to beat him. The thing that part of what isn't so like annoying, it's a good challenge of a boss fight, but the journey to get to Martyr Logarius is a pain in the ass, because this is, something Elden Ring sort of improved. This is having checkpoints. If From Software just featured better checkpoints to fight the bosses. Father Gascoigne was another one as well. Like, if you die, you have to do so much backtracking just to get to what is a difficult boss fight to die again. That's the most frustrating part. Father Gascoigne and Martyr Logarius are two bosses that you just want to be respawned right in front of the arena so you can get back up and take them down. And that's like the most frustrating thing about these fights. But they are really good challenges, and you feel really good when you finally do get that enemy vanquished, or prey slaughtered. I think it's prey slaughtered or something like that. All right. So we go to the Celestial Emissaries. This one, I'm just going to put it as a C. So the Healing Church has another sect to it called the Choir, and the Choir was doing all sorts of experiments with the old blood. And while they may have used the guise of that, oh, we have blood ministration and we can heal you of all sorts of diseases, the truth is they were looking for people as guinea pigs. And one of the people who was able to come upon a discovery to create sort of lesser kin of the old ones is Iosefka. And then we have the imposter Iosefka, who, if we send people to Iosefka's clinic, they will turn all the people we have sent to them into celestial emissaries. So they have discovered a means to effectively turn people into celestial emissaries. And it seems that if you go to confront the imposter Iosefka after the blood moon rises, she seems to be in the process of being impregnated, possibly by Odin, who is an old one that doesn't have any form, much like Ariana. So basically something strange is happening to her. A lot of people assume it's that she's pregnant or being impregnated because you can get a umbilical cord from her. That is necessary to get a ending for the game. And so here we confront all of the people who have been kept within the garden of the Choir that were turned into celestial emissaries. But the fight itself, it's just a whole bunch of celestial emissaries. You discover that there is one that is sort of the head of them all. And then they, once you attack them, they kind of become bigger. And it's really just kind of like a mob boss, because it's not just this big celestial emissary you're now fighting. It's also all these little ones. And you see them, you first encounter them in the forest to Bergenworth. And so it seems that even some scholars at Bergenworth were able to turn a few people into celestial emissaries. And it's like, yes, you're kind of on the right track to ascension, I guess you could say, but not really, because they're lesser old ones. And then but once you defeat the celestial emissary, you then confront who might be the one producing much of the old blood, and that is Abritus. She is the daughter of the cosmos. That's right. And it seems that she was left behind by all of the other old ones. At least that's what it seems to suggest. We don't know too much else about her, but she seems to be the one that the highest members of the Healing Church are working alongside with. And she doesn't attack you until you attack her. So she is someone that is very peaceful to humans. And it's funny because I'm putting her right behind Vicar Amelia. We do learn that Vicar Amelia was kneeling what looks to be Lawrence's skull, but behind the altar is where Abritus resides. So that's fascinating. The boss fight, I don't recall having any problems with her boss fight. I'm really kind of giving her more of a lore because she's sort of, because this, the choir of the Healing Church is an optional section, and it really just sort of shows us that, this is the dark side that they are hiding from the people, is that their human experiments, and it's come at the result of they actually are in direct contact with an old one who, while was left behind by all of the other old ones, is somewhat working alongside them as well. And then we have the One Reborn. I'm going to put this as a C. This one is sort of a reference to the Tower Knight from Demon Souls. However, the Tower Knight is a more superior boss fight. The One Reborn isn't too difficult. It has a really cool intro sequence. It's like this, it looks like the Blood Moon has given birth. And I believe it's the result of the School of Mensis trying to create an old one, using a variety of humans, as these are summoned by the bell summoning women, and it's composed of so many like human bodies. It is really grotesque. It's a lot of birth horror in it, but in terms of a boss fight, it's just really not that memorable. And I'm going to put Mikolash here as a C as well. In terms of lore, he is, now they call him the host of the Nightmare of Mensis. It seems that he is the only choir member of Mensis whose brain wasn't completely stillborn by communing with the brain of Mensis, which is an old god that probably is the power source. Well, not necessarily the power source behind the dream, but is another old one that is sort of being used by the Church of Mensis. And Mikolash seems to have been a former student of Bergenworth who founded the School of Mensis and tried to commune with Mergo, and is the only one whose brain was not stillborn. And we enter the dream by touching and we enter the Nightmare of Mensis by touching him. So he is the host. I guess he's the one with, it's really unclear what that means because you do kill him, but the nightmare doesn't disappear. And I think, that might, and it's because I think the true power behind the nightmare is Mergo, because when you kill Mergo, or silence Mergo's cries, it says nightmare slain or something like that. Yeah, but Mikolash was, someone who essentially has gone mad from all of the secrets they have learned. Whether or not they're aware that they have gone mad or not is a whole other story. But they are annoying because you have to chase them throughout the Church of Bergenworth. And not the Church of Bergenworth, but the School of Mensis. You have to chase them. And it's annoying. There is a way to sort of like get his AI to get to a section where you can then attack him. And he's got some really annoying attacks as well. But, he's not that difficult. He's just obnoxious. And for that, I give him a C. And then we have Mergo's wet nurse. I'm going to put her as a B because I love the design of her. And what's interesting is that you don't actually see her form. You can just see the clothing that she wears for the most part. Because like her head has sort of like a giraffe-like quality to it, and it's very similar to what the Elden Beast looks like. Because when I first saw the Elden Beast in Elden Ring, I was like, that's a lot like Mergo's wet nurse. And Mergo's wet nurse, so Mergo is the child of Odin and Queen Yharnam, because Queen Yharnam, we see her in her bridal dress. It seems like on her wedding night, she was then impregnated by Odin and shortly gave birth to Mergo. And we see her wedding dress, and right where her abdomen is all covered in blood. And it seems that her child was forcefully taken from her, and she is praying for us to please end the suffering of her baby. And of course, that doesn't want to happen because old ones, they don't tend to have children of their own. And well, I'll talk about that. So they long for a surrogate. So Margot is another old one who has become very attached to this infant old one born of a human mother. And so will die for this child. And so we have to defeat the old one that is protecting Margot in order to end Margot's suffering. The fight, this could be the final boss fight you do for one of the endings, and it's fine. I think it's a solid fight. I remember having a little bit of difficulty with when it gets dark and her arms are just reaching all over the freaking place, but other than that, it's actually not that hard. It's not that difficult, but it is sort of like the final fight. It can be a final boss. And it's a decent fight, and I really love the design of it. What's interesting though, what is very interesting, the music box that we play for Father Gascoigne, the same melody plays at the beginning of Margot's at the fight of Margot's wet nurse, which is very fascinating. And it sort of like lets us know that song may have a much deeper connotations with the old ones. It may be a religious hymn of sorts. So there's some interesting lore there. But yeah, it's a good fight. It's a good fight. So now we move on to Gehrman, the first hunter. This one, I'm going to put an A. Gehrman is the first hunter. He is a former scholar of Bergenworth. If you get the Hunter's DLC, he has a connection to the Hunter's Nightmare and what happened at the fishing hamlet village long ago. He has been the host of the dream, and it's something that he has been imprisoned for doing, possibly for what he did in the fishing hamlet. And so he is the first hunter. We discover his actual workshop in the game, in which we can find the actual doll that the doll we talk to in the dream is based on. And he doesn't really have much affection for the doll, and we'll touch upon the doll in a moment. But he's there for the most part of the game. He's not within the dream. You won't find him, but the times you do, he will kind of give you a little bit of a hint. He talks about Ludwig, who is considered the first church hunter. So he knew Ludwig. Ludwig was probably an apprentice of his, one of his first pupils as a hunter. And he also had a relationship with Lawrence. And it seems that he and Lawrence, they were good friends. And he's waiting for Lawrence to to hurry up and come free him from the dream. And, well, it's not going to happen. So we only fight Gehrman if you refuse to take his offer to end the contract. By ending the contract, you're basically severing your connection from the dream, severing all knowledge that you have learned, just becoming a regular hunter of the real world. And, yeah. So here is where we just don't have any of that. And I think he's a good fight. He is fairly challenging. And just like his introduction into this fight is so boss. And yeah, it's a solid fight. And then, but if you've consumed all the umbilical cords, you get the Moon Presence. And the Moon Presence, I'm also going to put that as an A, who is true name is Flora, I want to say. Because we hear that the doll gives a prayer of the hunter to Flora of the Moon. And this seems to be the presence that is responsible for the dream, as though there was a deal made between Gehrman and the Moon Presence long ago. Perhaps, and I'll touch upon what I think might have been involved in that, but I don't know for certain. There's nothing to confirm it. But I think part of why Gehrman is trapped within this dream is because of the Moon Presence, because if you don't consume the umbilical cords, but you do defeat Gehrman, the moon presence basically turns you into the next Gehrman. But if you do consume the umbilical cords, you have intellectually ascended enough to resist an old one. And so you have to take the moon presence down. And as a fight, it's still not that difficult. But it still really is a lot of fun. So yeah. And then once you defeat the moon presence, you have done enough. You've killed enough old ones to become an old one yourself. But an infant one. So you're just like this little baby slug. And now we get to the DLC. So we have Ludwig, the first blade, the Holy Blade. And I'm going to put him in S. So this is someone that we've heard of. His relationship to his blade is something very, very special, that there is a replica of it that you can purchase earlier in the game. And so when you do finally get to the Hunter's Nightmare, it's Yharnam, Central Yharnam, but it's all messed up. And there's this river of blood that flows through it. And it all leads to Ludwig, the first hunter. And so Ludwig has been listening to the advice given to him by his Holy Moonblade, which is a long-standing From Software weapon that appears in many of their games. And at first, he's known as the Accursed. And what's very interesting is that he is a member of the church whose beast-like quality is very different from all of the other people who have given in to the beastly scourge or their bloodthirst. And that is that he doesn't really resemble a wolf-like creature. He resembles a horse. Female horses are known as mares. So and we're in the Hunter's Nightmare. So I think there's a little bit of a pun on that. I want to say there was also something a little bit related to some Japanese folklore as well, but I can't really think of it at the moment. But yeah, this fight was very interesting because at first he is more bestial in the way that he fights you at the beginning. But then in the middle, his Moonblade speaks to him again and he remembers himself. And then you sort of can see what was the old hunter of legend of that all the other church hunters sort of respected. And at the end, you can kind of tell him he's worried that his followers aren't the noble heroes or knights that he wished for them to be. And you can either tell him the ugly truth or give him a beautiful lie. Make up your mind on which. If you don't kill him, Simon, the Bowblade Hunter, will, who's another character that's not really that important. So, but once we kill Ludwig, the Holy Blade, we get access to what the Healing Church was prior to the founding of the church, and that it was a sanatorium. And a sanatorium, very much like the choir. So the choir kind of is still maintaining a lot of what they were doing at the sanatorium and creating and doing human experiments and trying to create old ones. And many of them became living failures. And I'm just going to put this in B. It's an okay fight, but it's really not that hard. I think I'm being a little too generous when I think about it. So I think it's okay. It's fine. But yeah, it's just a whatever fight. No big deal. Yeah, so, these are, as you can tell, they sort of look like a celestial emissary, but the head is deflated. So they do have great powers of their own, but obviously there's just not something quite right about it. And yeah, and fighting them is really, I think it's probably one of the least frustrating fights in the game. But speaking of frustrating fights, we're going to get to Lawrence, the first vicar. He's also the founder of the church. And I'm going to put him in A, largely because he fucking annoyed me. Now, a lot of people were really upset that he was a cleric beast. He's just a cleric beast that's eternally on fire. And I feel like that makes a lot of sense because he founded the very thing that has led to, because he founded the Healing Church, which has really led to so much bloodlust amongst the hunters, and so much horror as well. And I think him, he becomes a cleric beast because usually the most bloodthirsty of the members of the church tend to become cleric beasts. And the fact that he's eternally on fire, I really think speaks to how he kind of created what is the hell of, the hell that Yharnam became. And it's interesting is that when you do find his body, you don't, when you first find his body, you don't fight him because you need to get a specific item after defeating Ludwig from what is basically the memory of the Healing Church before it became the Healing Church. And you have to get his human skull. It's interesting, Lawrence's beast skull is in the waking world, whereas in the nightmare it's his human skull. There's I think his beast self is still trying to find its skull, but and its other interesting imagery is that he's positioned in a way that's very much like how Christ is when he in Mary's arms when Christ came off the cross. So he's sort of like a martyr for the Healing Church as well, and he is kind of considered a martyr by the Healing Church. Let's just be honest. But he's also the one that's created the hell that Yharnam is now find themselves in. And just as a boss fight, he's obnoxious. This was one of the most frustrating boss fights, and I feel like it shouldn't have been frustrating, but it was. And so that's why he's, I do have to recognize there's so much lore significance to Lawrence. There was a YouTube video I remember watching where they're like, Bloodborne is the story of Lawrence. And I really think that is very true because Lawrence, after you defeat Vicar Amelia and you touch Lawrence's skull, you get Lawrence confronted Maester Wilhelm, and he's like, they had a different way of, viewing on how to ascend. Wilhelm basically believed we had to line our brains with eyes, whereas Lawrence was very much entranced by the blood and forgot the adage of the Church of Bergenworth, the password, fear the old blood, and you should fear the old blood. But unfortunately, he didn't fear it enough, and thus the state he is in is of his own making. But yeah, he gets in. The boss fight was extremely frustrating in the worst ways. It wasn't a good frustration like Father Gascoigne and Martyr Logarius specifically, because I really loved that fight with Martyr Logarius. But but lore-wise, yes. He is super, super important, and one can argue that the story of Bloodborne is the story of Lawrence. All right, and then we get to Lady Maria. After you defeat the living failures, you fight Lady Maria. She is actually the direct apprentice of Father Gascoigne, and she uses a lot of Cainhurst weaponry, and has very Cainhurst attire. I don't believe she is the traitor that took blood to the Vile Blood Queen. I don't believe that. Even though she's the only member of Bergenworth that we know of that has a connection to Cainhurst, I don't think it was her. And Lady Maria was someone that was very much beloved, and it's implied that not Father Gascoigne, I'm looking at him, Gehrman seems to have been, they called it obsessed or a mania when it comes to the creation of the doll. And the doll was made in a likeness to Lady Maria. It seems that after Lady Maria took her own life, Gehrman missed her dearly, so much so that he wanted to recreate her. And I think he wanted to bring the doll to life, and the Moon Presence pretty much did that. And while the doll had the kindness and gentleness that many of the patients praise and cry out for Lady Maria, and it seems that Lady Maria was very, very sweet and kind to all the patients in the sanatorium, she was still a hunter, and she was a very noble and good hunter. And I think the doll does epitomize her hospitality and her generosity and her kindness. But unfortunately, the doll is not Maria. She will, no matter how much she looks like her, no matter how much she talks like her, no matter how her kindness is like Maria's kindness, she will never be Maria. She will always be an imitation. And so Garamond does not care for the doll. But Maria did something, participated in the massacre of the fishing hamlet, which has led to pretty much everything has fallen from that. And it's something that she has deeply regretted. She threw away her sword, the rakuyo, and eventually took her own life. And now her spirit is, because of what she did in the fishing hamlet, is cursed to the hunter's nightmare. And she has decided to keep guard in the clock tower that leads to the core of the nightmare, the deepest part, the darkest secret of the church. And that's when we come and fight her. And she understands, oh yeah, I get it. I get why you want to know of the secrets, but I cannot let you. And the fight with her, because it took me 7 years to get to fighting her. And so I'm hearing from everyone who's played this game how they love the boss fight with Lady Maria, and it seems that they kind of took her fight template and put it in Dark Souls 3 quite a bit as well. And I kept hearing that, and it really wasn't until I played against her, where I fought against her, that I understood it. There is a beauty to it. She is such an amazing hunter, and yet each time you get to like a third of her health, she then starts to get really desperate, and she starts using the blood arts that are very common within Canehurst swordsmanship. But it's something that once you know how much she despised what she did herself, that she's resorting to desperation. She is so desperate to keep you from discovering the truth behind everything. Why the hunt is happening, the beastly scourge, the hunter's dream, the hunter's nightmare, behind everything. And eventually, unfortunately, she just isn't strong enough, because we do defeat her, and we do learn that what happened is Cause, an old one, washed upon the fishing hamlet, and the villagers of the fishing hamlet aren't quite human anymore. They are something of a mix between human and old one. They have, to what the Church of Bergenworth would say, have ascended. And this has to do with their relationship to Cause. And so the Church of Bergenworth, after sending Rom there, and Rom, I think more like an anthropological sort of way, was able to gain ascension through Cause. I mean, assuming what Mikolash has said is true. Bergenworth was like, okay, we need to get a hold of Cause. We need to get like a sample or something like that. But the fishing hamlet was very protective of Cause. And it seems that Cause was one of the few old ones that actually was able to become pregnant. Although it does seem that but each old one loses their child. And so if the old ones, if they can't have children of their own, the ones that do have children of their own, it sort of, I think, goes badly for them. Kind of like, Cubone and Marowak from Pokemon, where Cubone is a Pokemon that wears its mother's skull. And it's thus suggesting that Marowaks, after giving birth, shortly die. And I think that Cause was somewhere in the process. And because she's an old one, I think death doesn't quite look the same to her as it does to humans. But she was pregnant with a child. And in order to get to Cause, the Bergenworth hunters, Garamond, Maria, Lawrence, possibly Mikolash, massacred everyone in the village. And then they desecrated Cause's corpse, trying to get samples or whatever else they needed for their research. Basically killed the baby. And the Orphan of Cause is one of the hardest fights in From Software. I would say Millennia, Blade of Mikola is harder. I think one of my friends would disagree because, like, one of my friends, he's like a From Software veteran, and he was like, "Oh, I'm like not trying to brag or anything, but it only took me 5 attempts to beat Millennia," and I'm like, liar. But like, no, I know he's not lying, but like, it's like, yeah, of course you're not trying to brag. So the Orphan of Cause here is a very difficult fight. Now, I was doing pretty well against his first phase. It's this second phase that is just crazy, and I had to have help with this second phase. But there is a connection between the Orphan of Cause and Gehrman, because the cry that the Orphan has when we see them come out of Cause is the exact same cry that Gehrman has. So it does seem that there is, some of the people that are being tortured of the nightmare. So while Lawrence and Maria, they're trapped within the Hunter's nightmare, Gehrman, because of the moon presence, is trapped within the dream. But because of what Gehrman did in the Fishing Hamlet, he still has a very strong connection to the nightmare. And so as long as the Orphan of Cause is in the nightmare suffering, so Gehrman too will be haunted by in his dreams. And I think it's the last protagonist. They kind of do some what are lost in translation videos, and one of the interesting things with the Orphan of Cause is that in Japanese, while the Orphan of Cause is an accurate translation, it is sort of a bit of a wordplay, because the usage of orphan that they use in Bloodborne is a very archaic term that can also is a homonym for a word that translates to the will. So it's like the Orphan of Cause is not just the baby of Cause, but also probably the last vestiges of Cause herself taken form as her baby. So essentially like the will of Cause. We're fighting against the will of Cause itself. And it is angry, justifiably angry at what the people of Bergenworth did. And it is because of this that all hunters are cursed to the nightmare upon their death. And I think some people really focus on the Lovecraftian themes, because Bloodborne starts off as a very gothic horror game, and then you start to realize it has much more of a cosmic horror atmosphere to it. I think we shouldn't completely ignore the gothic horror, because this is a game where at its core is people becoming beasts. It's a werewolf kind of game. And werewolf is, and this sort of transformation of a human becoming a beast is considered a curse traditionally in literature. And, even with like stories like Beauty and the Beast, there are many adaptations where the beast is kind of, more like a werewolf than, a beast, but like, yeah, he was essentially and the Disney version, which is probably the more popular version in this day and age, he was sort of cursed as being a very vain and selfish person, that his humanity was basically non-existent. So he was cursed to the body of a beast. And I think that's something that's very important, is those who imbibe in the blood of the Healing Church, those who partake in their bloodthirst, ultimately are cursed because of what they did with Cause. And it all starts with the old blood. And the old blood was tainted. It just didn't match. It wasn't compatible with humans. And I think part of that had to do with because of Cause's curse. And I think that is something that should be acknowledged, is that everything that is happening in Yharnam, the Nights of the Hunt, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Night of the Hunt is when the moon is full. So I think and there's so much connotations in this game with menstruation, School of Menses, for example. And, there's a joke that, there is a connection between when a woman has her period and when the moon is full. And there are a couple of women in the games, like not all, and there's even like a huge theory that the blood that we take in is, I'm looking at the time here, I got to get going here soon. So that the blood that we take in is period blood. And I would say not all of it. Some of it, yes. I would say the blood we get from Ariana is period blood. And maybe from the other blood ministers, like Adele, I think it is period blood. So basically, I think period blood is the good stuff, the good blood that you want to take. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because a period is basically when the uterine wall is shedding, essentially, because the woman failed to get pregnant. And so while our body doesn't need the extra lining that it does need to nurture a fertilized egg, so it sheds. And, it takes a little while for that to come out. And there's not just blood in it, there's all sorts of, like, there's, a bit of tissue as well. And I think because, and that's sort of like, human, we all come from the womb. And so I think because, it is sort of the blood that is the origin of life. And thus, I think it has better properties because it is menstrual. And I think so the nights of the hunt in Yharnam are always the night of the full moon. That's my theory. And there's so much connection. Yeah. And even like with like the tides, the fishing hamlet, the moon and the ocean are connected as well. So there's a lot of that. And I think that, combining it with, the werewolf aspect to it also is very fitting, that these nights when people turning into beasts, when the beastly scourge is most, active within a person's body, or when they're more prone to it, is during the night of the full moon. So it's very much, I think that we need to, I sort of wish more people would acknowledge that there is a bit of a gothic horror element still. Yes, it is mostly cosmic in nature, but I think the cosmic is something related to divine, and this is a curse of the divine. That's what is overall happening. I hope I made sense. I have to get going to work here. Thank you so much for watching and wishing me a happy birthday. If you kindly do so, please, even if it isn't on Monday the 21st. I hope I made sense. Now, I'm not rating these other ones because I haven't really done the Chalice Dungeons. You got Yharnam, the Temerian Queen. She is basically the queen who the city is named after. I think only her spirit is alive. Her body isn't dead, but her spirit is alive and somewhat trapped in the nightmare of Mensis. But yeah, she's kind of like the a bonus final boss, and I don't care about the others, whatever. But yeah, this is just something I wanted to do for fun, and I will try to maybe do some more of this. I love to talk about Bloodborne a bit, so maybe once I get my thoughts more organized, because they really aren't right now, I'll talk a bit more about this. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. I hope to be making a bit more videos soon. I am working seasonal at this time. I'm still trying to find other work, and hopefully I can get a job where it isn't so physically taxing on me and it is a bit more of a stable schedule, and just because I was hoping to make more videos more frequently after the Silent Hill stream, but then I got sick. And yeah, I was really sick. I wasn't even playing video games. I was so not feeling myself. That's how sick I was. And so I'm hoping to make more videos here soon. I'm just working hard, trying to find, just working hard. This year's been very rough, and I hope to get more at this here. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. You've been a doll.